Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. For me, I found psychedelic medicines during a time in which I was moving through distortions within my experience of life, such as anxiety and depression. What I found in psychedelic medicines was hope where there was once none. And while I will never say that these medicines are necessary for everyone, I will say that I, along with many individuals, such as today's guest, have been able to rediscover hope and allow that hope to help them build the lives they know they are capable of living through journeying in the world of plant medicines. Today's guest on the show is a master NLP practitioner, where he first learned about the ability of the subconscious to be reprogrammed. He is also a coach, where he assists his clients in opening up to new possibilities within their lives. He is also a biohacker, where he helps others get back to their prime state of health, and is the founder of the Rewired retreats, where he assists his clients in working with not only plant medicines, but also NLP, coaching, biohacking, and community to allow them to usher in their next level of evolution. And in today's episode, we dive into his journey into psychedelic medicines, his journey of assisting his wife through complex PTSD and severe depression with the assistance of plant medicines, his tips on how to work with these medicines in a conscious manner for profound results, and much, much more. So please, help me in welcoming my man Mike Zeller to the show. Mike Zeller, my man, dude, it's amazing to have you with me. You know, you are such an eclectic individual with so much experience in so many different realms, like I mentioned in the intro, with flow states, nootropics, psychedelics, mindset, somatic processing, like all of these different things. You know, the first question I love asking my guests is like, how did you get into these things? Because, you know, typically I'll ask people how they got into psychedelics, but all those things I just mentioned are a psychedelic, right? Like somatic processing, mindset, nootropics, all of these things can be a psychedelic experience because they show us more of what is possible for us, more of what our potential is. And so how did Mike Zeller get started on this journey of, shameless plug here, being highly optimized?
Yeah, good question, my friend. Well, you know, like in high school, I played sports and I was a baseball player, and I was like, man, how do I get to be the best, like best I can be, not necessarily the best in the world, but the best, get the most out of my one and only life and my one and only like potential. And so then I got into like psychology a little bit and started noticing, hey, the difference between good and great is often psychology. And then I got into Tony Robbins. So I started studying Tony and got master NLP certified and went into all the peak performance psychology, leadership, all that stuff, and how to rewire your subconscious. And then ultimately got into psychedelics. As I was journeying on, I was into like nootropics and how to optimize your brain and your focus and energy and all that jazz. Well, psychedelics, we got into it really because of my wife's mental health crisis. When she got pregnant, I didn't get pregnant, but when she got pregnant in October 2020, like it started a whole host of hormonal issues and mental health challenges. And she's a suicide survivor from crazy abusive upbringing, but she hadn't had any of those suicidal problems really for years. And well, when we had when she got pregnant, it just really cascaded and accelerated. 3 or 4 panic attacks a week, deep depression, suicidal ideation, and ultimately complex PTSD. But it took me about a year and a half to figure out she had complex PTSD. Man, it was a brutal season, but psychedelics I'm sure we'll get into it, but they were a lifesaver for us.
Yeah, dude, that's wild, man. And I imagine a lot of people listening can relate too, because I mean, I can't go back in all the history, but I can say that in the present day, there is more mental health challenge than there ever has been. And, you know, again, there's also a medical system that is based on really sick care, right? They call it healthcare, but at the end of the day, it's about treating things. And again, I say this whenever I give this caveat every time. It's not that sick care is not necessary sometimes. Sometimes we're really sick and we need some sick care, right? But we are much more often looking to be healthy than we are trying to get away from being sick.
Yeah.
And so does it really make sense for our quote unquote healthcare to be all surrounding what we do when we get sick versus running towards where we want to go, which is health, which is vitality, which is harmony, which is, union and euphoria and ecstasy and all of these things. Right. And, I'd love if you could share a little bit about, when she had the diagnosis, right, or when you realized what was going on, what was the conversation maybe you had or conversations you had around psychedelics? Because I know that a lot of people reach out to me and they have family members or loved ones that are going through things. And obviously we never want to tell people around us what to do. But at the same time, when we find things that we know have supported us, we want to be able to share those things with the people we love. So how did you navigate that situation?
Yeah, a good question. So my wife is a little bit of a hypochondriac. So I was like, man, I almost think of it as a 6-month roadmap to get her to say yes to what she needs to do. Now we've gotten it down to a 2 or 3 month roadmap because she's started realizing, hey, she needs to trust me a little bit more on some of the things. And I need to trust her more on certain things too, in all fairness. So I started researching it. I literally listened to 100 podcasts in probably 6 months. I stopped listening to my sports podcasts and my other things. I was like, man, it kind of hit me one day. My wife, and this happened multiple times, but one day I was about to lead a coaching call with a dozen entrepreneurs that were paying me a couple grand a month each to coach them. And it's a 90-minute coaching call. And she hands me our infant at the time, bolts out of the room, out of our house, and doesn't tell me anything except she can't handle Sonnet anymore. And she has to leave. She was hitting overwhelm and she was getting panic attacks and PTSD and all that stuff was kicking in. I was like, oh, wow. All right. And that happened again and again. And I was like, man, we're not going to get out of this if I can't figure out how to get her well. And I felt like we were using some tools like somatic psychotherapy that was helpful, creating awareness, it would help her in the day. But tomorrow it would be back, Sonnet would scream and then she's off again. And neurofeedback was helping on her anxiety. Somatic psychotherapy, like I said, was really great. Emotion code was terrific. But they were velvet hammers and they were making incremental progress. I was like, dude, this is in my NLP, pattern interrupt, reprogramming, subconscious. It wasn't working. It wasn't enough. And I was like, this is something much different. And then I started studying trauma and started reading Dr. Peter Levine's book, Healing Trauma, and all these other books, and started listening to podcasts on trauma, PTSD, etc. But then, of course, if you listen to traditional therapists, on that, they're like, you need SSRIs, and they're talking about all this other stuff. And man, there's no hope. There's literally no hope. APA says complex PTSD is incurable, treatment-resistant depression, incurable. But then I heard enough about psychedelics, and I actually had a guy's trip where we did some psilocybin mushrooms. And my wife would have said no, probably told me not to do it. But I didn't fully know what we were going to do, but I was going to do whatever we were going to do. I wasn't going to say no. I was like, I'm going in. I'd done research. Maybe this could help us. Maybe it could help me. And I did it. It was a 2.5 gram dose with my buddies. Beautiful blend. And I got flooded with gratitude. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life for 3 to 4 hours. And I was with, 4 of my best friends, and it was epic. It was up outside of Mount Rainier in Washington. Then I texted her while I was still, on the journey a little bit towards the end of the journey, and I was kind of weepy. I'm so grateful, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, what did you do? And all this stuff. And she was kind of upset, which I knew she would be. She just always is anytime we do something new. That she didn't give approval. This is her hypochondriac side kicking in. Yeah. But I got to figure it out. I got to be the poisonous mushroom eater and try things. And then I came back, convinced her, hey, we got to give this a try. And I convinced her with the research. We watched the Netflix series, How to Change Your Mind. We watched some other YouTube's podcasts. I sent her 4 or 5 of the best podcasts I'd heard, Huberman, Tim Ferriss, etc. And she eventually said yes. And so we did a little half for her. It was half a dose with her sister and her brother-in-law. And you know what we did on the first, and she was in deep depression spiral at this time. It was on a Saturday night. We laughed. That's what happened. We just took the medicine and it knew what we needed. And so we were just my brother-in-law, John, and I were giggling for 30 minutes straight, tears just flowing. We couldn't stop giggling. And Sarah my wife is just jibber jabbering and talking. And she was so funny, and she was laughing, and her sister was laughing. It was an incredible night. And then about a month later, we did our first heart ceremony, which is mostly body medicine. It's a blend of Kanna, sassafras, MDMA. So it's not, in many regards, we wouldn't call those true psychedelics because they don't take you off in the galaxy, seeing things and shapes. You're very present to your body, which is also why they're great for PTSD and trauma, because you get so connected. Dissociative ketamine, psilocybin, ayahuasca, those are wonderful as well in a different capacity. But we did that. We walked in, and I remember my wife, hypochondriac again, was a ceremony. So we had like 20 people. My wife had to have an emergency therapy session on a Saturday afternoon with her therapist, who fortunately was available, and talked her into it. And was very familiar and warm to plant medicines and had used them and was training actually for them. Well, her therapist talked her off the ledge, basically. But even then, my wife we had a little code word. If she felt overwhelmed and want to leave, that we would leave. And she'd give me the word and would bolt out the room. Fortunately, she didn't. But when the medicine kicked in, 10 minutes in, I was flooded with love for her and compassion, where I walked in with resentment and frustration and just and despair, and she walked in with despair and resentment, like, hey, are we ever going to get unstuck? And we were like so at each other, because I'm like, you're sabotaging my ability to produce income for us. And I can't babysit you and our daughter. And she's like, well, she didn't want to be battling depression. She didn't want to have a broken leg at the time or broken foot at the time either. So that's a long story short of how we got into it. But it gave us hope. And it started after that ceremony. We're like, oh, we had heart connection and love flowing instead of resentment and bitterness. And it was the most healing thing we had for our relationship. And then we've since obviously continued on the journey, and we're like so much more unified and heart connected and in beautiful space now. And yeah, it's been a magical journey, and it's truly given us our life back.
Hey everybody, I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. Dude, Mike, this is why I created the show, man, because this is a perfect example of how I was just talking to Hamilton about this too. For those listening, Hamilton Souther has been on the show a couple of times, just recently, a couple of weeks ago too. And, we were talking about how, why in the world would God decide to put certain plants and medicines and compounds on the earth if we weren't meant to use them, right? Like, I think a lot of us fail to see how deep the programming goes, right? And even with the programming, then there's also these tendencies, right? Like hypochondriacism, OCD, et cetera, that are also distortions, right? And again, it's no judgment. I've had my own fair share of anxieties and OCDs and things like that. But let's call them what they are. They're distortions, right? And so what I love about these medicines is that, for someone going through really complex PTSD or really deep depression, where they're having suicidal thoughts and things like that, to go to a therapist's office who's just going to tell them, well, if you spend years doing this, you might see a change. That's enough to make them want to off themselves. I think for some of us that, again, for us right now in this mentality, of course, me and you both do this stuff for a living, but for someone who's not living with that, it might be hard to put themselves in the shoes of that person to really feel like you are hopeless. A lot of people haven't got there where they've tried everything they can think of and nothing is working. And that ability for you guys to connect in that medicine and within 10 minutes have all of that stuff on top of the metaphorical dinner table just get thrown off of it. Yeah. And remember, oh my God, this isn't just a mess here. This is a beautiful table that we can eat at and have memories at and, have family members over and create memories and all of these things. And so it's what the medicine does is it takes away the things that are not actually us. It takes away the distortions. And what is left is the divine nature of what we truly are. And when we're on that level, all of us want to connect with one another because we realize we're all one another, just walking each other home, as Ram Dass says, you know?
Yeah.
And so I love that you're able to articulate that story, man, because it's exactly why I started the show, you know, because there are so many people, and I've trained with some of these organizations that are still stuck in the fear mongering and propaganda surrounding medicines. Oh, you know, you wouldn't do that if you really respected yourself, or that's no way to get to God, or any of these things, where I'm like, you know what the right way to get to God is? It's definitely not telling people they need to pay another $5,000 to get to the next class to be able to recognize God, right? And if you don't go there, you're going to be banished to hell. Like, that is not whatsoever what God is. And I think that a lot of these organizations fear psychedelics because they realize that once you connect with one of these medicines in a conscious and safe manner, you're never going to be the same again. And you're never going to buy that bullshit again, because you realize that everything was always inside of you. It's perfect.
100%. And it's like, you look at big pharma and even like just even ADHD medicine. I have people that have had to do massive detoxes and rebuilding their neurochemistry from ADHD medicine for 7 years. Like, much less SSRIs that give you weight gain, hormonal issues. Once you're off, you plummet off a cliff emotionally and mentally, because it is just a Band-Aid, and they don't heal, right? Like, I'm okay with medicines for short term and for, you know, like, obviously I wouldn't say trust your doctor, but like get guidance and wisdom and use your own intuition, because at the end of the day, like, we're great in America at getting people on medicines. How are SSRIs worse than psilocybin that has no side effects in general? Like, when done safely. I'm not saying like people can take too much and be scared and it can create issues. But when done properly and with safety and with wisdom and preparation, just like anything, right? When I was doing the research, what astonished me was there was no hope, no real cure for significant depression and complex PTSD. And in fact, therapists are essentially advised and told that, hey, you can't say there's a cure. Or psychiatrists can't say there's a cure. Well, you know, I'm not going to say clinically, data-wise, obviously there's so much coming out. But what I saw in the research from Johns Hopkins and other universities in stage 3 clinical trials, FDA's fast-tracked a lot of this, and you can find a lot on maps.org, but 70%, up to 70% of participants, even from the first dose, were showing total remission of symptoms of depression 1 year later. And I was like, okay, there's something here, right? And now I know from my friend like Dr. Manish Gurn, who's a psychedelic neuroscientist, your neuroplasticity doubles for 2 to 14 days after a significant dose of psilocybin or MDMA, which means your nervous system and your brain is receptive for change. Doesn't mean it's going to change. And if you go right back in the same stressful, tense environment, whatever, you're going to just program it back in. But it's like you got white space to be reprogrammed. You got white powder to go down that ski slope and create new neuro grooves. And we've seen that. And that's why integration is so important with these substances, and the intentions and the setting and the community and the proper guidance. Well, now we've personally seen firsthand, and I've seen from my retreats, 25 plus people have significantly beautiful, life-changing experiences. Some of them that came in with deep depression, other stuff that have been battling for 25 years, essentially gone.
Yeah. It's wild, man.
Yeah.
I was at Arcadia, Aubrey's festival, back in November. And one of my favorite things to do in the medicine space is lead breath work, you know, especially when medicines are being connected with.
So good.
Fucking beautiful. It's amazing, you know? And so I had met this gentleman. I won't say his name. I don't think he would care, but I'll just keep it private. But I met this guy, and it was one of the best parts of Aubrey's festival is just getting to meet a lot of the people that had seen the podcast we did together and whatnot. And so this gentleman came up to me and said, hey, I loved your show. It was so awesome. And I just immediately felt this feeling. I was like, dude, you're hanging out with our crew. You're part of us now. Come with us. And so we ended up hanging out, and, you know, we had someone there who had medicines. And so, you know, we had all decided to dose together. And so I had asked this gentleman, I said, hey, you ever done breath work before? And he said, oh, only once. You know, I was at a tattoo. I was getting a tattoo, and my tattoo artist is completely sober. And so I had decided, like, instead of trying to use cannabis or something like that, I'm going to try this breath work that he's talking about. So he goes, my only experience is like when I was in a lot of pain, right? And it worked, but, you know, it probably isn't the same experience. I was like, okay, cool. So We literally walked out from the stage we were viewing the music at. And I was like, all right, we're going to sit in a circle. And we just sat right down on the concrete and just ripped a couple of rounds of breath work. Dude, like it completely changed this guy's life, like completely changed it. Like, I mean, he's been doing breath work every single day since. And this is integration, right? Because he got the message. He got the message that it's not the medicine that made this possible, right? Yeah. The medicine opened up the ability for me to know it was possible. Yeah. And once you integrate that, you don't necessarily need the medicine to remind you of that one thing again. Then the lessons get deeper. I was just talking to Hamilton about this too. He's like, dude, the lessons never stop, man. But do you want to keep going at the same lesson over and over? Like the analogy I always use is like, imagine that you are a race car driver and you have a dragster. And so your only fun is taking it out on the track and ripping it, just sending it as fast as you can, right? Well, that's great, right? That's the analogy or the metaphor of like going to ceremonies every weekend. But if you don't take that car back to the shop and actually ask yourself, why didn't it perform the way I wanted it to perform? Or, you know, what did I learn out on the track this time that could make my next performance even better and more fun? Then all you're going to do is eventually you're just going to have a car that's just unable to get down the track because it needs so much work. And so at the end of the day, yes, these medicines can increase self-awareness, but there is such a thing as like too much at once, right? And so if you're still integrating from the last ceremony that you did 3 days ago, and now you're slamming the buttons again, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I'm just going to say that you're missing an opportunity to really co-communicate and co-create with these plants, you know, because they want what's best for us. Just like, I mean, you're a coach, I'm a coach, right? Like, how would we feel if our client showed up and started worshiping the ground we walked on and like praying to it? We'd be like, whoa, okay, this is kind of weird. Like, you know, some twin flames vibes or something. You know, at the end of the day, we want them to know that we can support them. But if we give them accountability and they show up week after week, just being like, I didn't do it. Eventually, we're going to be like, why are you paying us money? Right? Like, we're not doing the work for you. You know, we're just opening up the ability of you to know what to do and then hold you accountable to that vision we see of you as something greater than what you believe yourself to be. And that's exactly what the plants do.
Yeah. It's a tool. It's a tool in your toolbox. And like you said, it opens up. Like, I don't need the medicines to be more heart connected now. But before then, as a masculine man who's a high thinker, not very much of a feeler, it was like I lived most of my life in my head. It was like I was a human with a head, heart that pumps blood, but not as heart connected. Now I have at least a 2-lane highway between my head and my heart versus before maybe it was a gravel road, right? And so and I can connect with more empathy with my wife and daughter. Literally after the ceremonies, I would come home. I rock my daughter to sleep. I usually put my daughter to sleep at night. She's 2.5 years old now. And I would have tears just coming down, feeling so much love and connected to her. And so grateful that I have this moment, right? Because, 10 years from now, I'm not going to be rocking her to sleep. Not even another year probably. And, but I didn't have that before then because I didn't have that vibrant heart connection. And if you look at Heart Math Institute's research, for example, the heart is 60 times more electromagnetically powerful than your brain, measured by ECGs. So like they can scientifically measure the electromagnetic waves, and it can extend when you're in heart coherence, your heart field can extend up to 9 feet. Well, if you're in a state of tension, stress, fear, doubt, anxiety, it's like inches. You're not powerful and radiant. Like I feel powerful and radiant now because I've cleared out all the baggage that I was carrying, all the negative energy, all the emotional constipation. Same for my wife. Like we're free. We feel emotionally free and vibrant now in a way I've never felt before.
I mean, I 100% agree. We can see it a lot in posture too, right? People that are very like closed off like that. I was that person at one point. I had like the classic tech neck type thing, but it was before technology was what it was now. It was when I was like 16, 17. And it was because I was like scared to feel, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I thought that certain feelings were desirable and certain were undesirable. And I think a lot of us grew up in this world, like, for men specifically, I know because I'm a man, right? So, we deal with the whole boys don't cry and things like that, that these days is starting to be like, what? We really believed that? But a lot of us grew up in those times. And even though we might not believe it now, it's rooted in our bodies. And that's what I loved about Bester Vanderkolk's work and all of these amazing, traumatic researchers and looking at how the body really keeps the score, right? Like the
100%.
tension and trauma, it gets stored in our body. And so in order to heal, we must get out of the mind and into the body and allow the body to do what it already knows how to do. Like we keep thinking that, or I'll make it personal. I always thought that healing was some like calculus equation, but it's really not. It's actually like the calculus equation is trying to get the mind out of the way so the body can do what it already knows how to do.
Yeah. Speaking of, do you know the story of the polar bears?
No,
1984?
Tell me.
Okay. So this was a massive breakthrough in trauma. All right. They were doing researchers for years up in Alaska would, chase down polar bears in a helicopter, shoot them with a tranquilizer gun, carry them back, tag them, check all the vitals, release them back in the wild. Well, researchers were completely puzzled for year after year because as the tranquilizer was wearing off, the polar bears were making all this frantic energy and movement. Then one day, a researcher played the videotape of the polar bear in slow motion as the tranquilizer was wearing off. And what did they see? The legs were running. It was running out the energy because the last time it was conscious, it was being chased by this machine that it has no idea what the heck it is. It's very loud. And it's usually the king of the predatory landscape and the landscape it lives in. And it was releasing the energy or releasing the trauma, right? And it was instead of being stuck in it. Well, what do we do as humans? We repress, we suppress, we hold on, and we relive it for decades or a lifetime. How many people, everybody knows someone that just lived their trauma over and over and were just emotionally stuck for the rest of their life. Something happened. They got divorced. They got this happened, lost a child. They suffered something. And I felt like I had trapped energy, from called entrepreneurial PTSD. I had some crap, right? Made some mistakes, boneheaded decisions, lost some money, relational issues. And then I had stuff from my dad. My dad grew up in World War II Germany, born in 1940, saw the bombers fly over, saw the Jews walk through the streets as a little boy, right? So, all this stuck trauma. Then he wasn't given the tools to process. I mean, he's still alive, but he's not conscious enough to seek the processing of that. I love my dad, but he's just not, right? Well, so Animal Kingdom is designed to naturally release this stuff. They're programmed. Like I remember watching a nature show of a wildebeest getting caught by a lion, dragged back, still alive, wiggles out, runs away. Lion's too tired to chase it down. What's the wildebeest doing a few minutes later? Eating grass. I'm like, you were just in the mouth of a lion. How are you eating grass now? Don't you have to process this trauma for counseling and therapy for the next 6 months? Whatever, right? Well, as humans, we might keep going to therapy or whatever and still holding on to it and reliving it and boom, boom, boom. Or just reliving it our own. We don't need therapists to relive it. Our nervous system can just hold on to it plenty good. Well, guess what? If we can learn, that's the power of these medicines, power of experiences, breath work, power of meditation, power of a lot of these things. The healing shifts when the energy moves through you and you reassociate because memories are encoded according to feelings. So if I can re-encode new feelings into that old memory, that's when the energy shifts. And that's when your identity has freedom to become something new and more powerful too. You're no longer a victim, you're a victor, right?
Yes, dude. I love that, man. And it's so funny, man. Like hearing you speak about this is so resonant because it's exactly what I believe, right? Like the idea that at any point in time, right? Like divine texts talk about it and sacred texts talk about it as being the creator of your reality. Other people refer to it as you being God in human form, right? Like any of these like very esoteric concepts, I think when we break them down, like these are really like what we're speaking to, right? That we all have the ability to reprogram our subconscious mind. We all have the ability to feel into our feelings, not only to release them, but also to manifest, right? Like tune into the feelings of our future and these kind of things. Yet at the same time, most of us have no idea just how much we've been indoctrinated and programmed. Because I know for me, when I was getting into this, right, like I think back to my childhood and I'm like, well, wait a minute, like I had an awesome childhood, like literally picture perfect. Like my parents just had knocked it out of the park. And again, no one's perfect, but like I couldn't remember any like severe traumatic event. I mean, I've gone to some of these events with people where they're talking about molestations and just horrible things, right? And so there's a part of me that almost felt like I don't have a right to like be traumatized because I didn't go through anything like that. But at the same time, recognizing that like, well, trauma is relative, right? Like if someone's gone through something challenging, it's very easy to see it as like, oh, wow, that's more challenging than I went through. But we don't know the relevance to what that trauma is, right? Like, I've met people, as I'm sure you have too, that have gone through insanely traumatic stuff and they've been able to somehow just keep a positive mindset through it, right? Yeah. Like, and this is why, like, I think trauma and these kind of things that are a little more qualitative are hard to measure, because we would like to think, right? We would like to put boxes around things and go, well, if someone gets stabbed, that's always going to be a traumatic event, right? Yeah. But if someone, maybe spills milk as a kid, that's not really trauma. But there's no way to categorize it. And that's, I think, what makes it very challenging when we try to research it, right? And get into the science of it. And I'm not saying the science and the research isn't valuable or, needed. It's extremely valuable and needed, but not at the expense of missing out on the experience, and I think that's where a lot of people are at, is they research a lot about trauma there. It's all a head game, like you were saying, right? Like I was there for many years as well, just because I didn't know, like I would hear this thing about being in the body, but like, how do you quantify that? Like I have a body, I guess I'm in it, right? Like, these things can be challenging. What's great about plants, right, is that you just set it and forget it, right? Like it's like a crock pot, right? You take it. And again, like obviously the caveat, guys, you always know, is safely, responsibly, consciously, with intention and a ceremony. All those things apply. But at the same time, like when you do those things, you will have the experience of what healing is, of what being in the body is, of what being the creator of your reality is. And then from there, from that experience, now you can go learn about like, what the hell did I just experience? Yeah. Like, I think that's where a lot of the challenges is people are putting the cart before their horse. They're going and learning about all these things. They don't know how to actually capitulate and contextualize in their experience, instead of just going to have the experience and then reverse engineering from there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And the crazy thing is, another aspect is like each of us are different. And so you also, and we've been through different journeys and different stories. And that's why, like, I have another couple that wants to come to my next Rewired retreat. And it's incredibly powerful for couples. And they are in a little bit of a stuck season, and they have frustrations and resentment, 2 little toddlers. And so they got a stressful season of life, and they need to recalibrate their relationship from the vibration of stress and anxiety and frustration to love, connection, and empathy, and joy and play, right? Like, and that's what's going to happen when they get their butts to the retreat. But unfortunately, the wife was misguided as well by someone else. She was on another event, and we had talked, but she didn't know much about it. And someone inappropriately gave her too much psilocybin. So she did 7.5 grams on her first journey.
Oh my God.
Which is and I'm like, all right, so like anyone listening, so that created anxiety and paranoia. All right. And then I'm going to have to help her move through that. And she also has some brain fog on the other side of that. So, and it wasn't even the right medicine for her. Yeah. Right. She, in the case of where this couple is at, they needed the heart and body medicine. And then if they wanted to do a little bit of psilocybin, all good, but they didn't need a lot. And so she took, 5 times more than what she probably needed to take on a psilocybin on the first journey. And it's just like, you go to a psychiatrist. I've seen medical doctors mess up their patients with, medical errors and misdiagnosis, and is one of the leading causes of death in the U.S. Little known fact is I think it's the 3rd or 4th leading cause of death. So you also have to treat things really responsibly, know who you're working with, know that they know their stuff, but also know that these things can be incredibly powerful. They're among the biggest breakthrough in our lifetime is happening right now in the mental health space and the brain peak optimization, where this advent of psychedelics and reemergence, or they call it the third wave. This third wave is coming and is shifting. It's going to shift generations and heal trauma and open up the world to a greater level of love and consciousness. It's happening in communities we swim in. Mm-hmm. So I can't advocate enough for it, but I also have to caveat it with, you got to do it wisely. And then the other layer that I think is magical, that not enough people are emphasizing, and that why I love what we do at my retreats as well, is like your brain is so fresh and ready to be reprogrammed. So if you have money blocks, if you have relationship patterns, if you have old trauma, it's not a time to relive that suffering. It might be to release it, but then what do you really want out of your life? Get connected to that and see that that is possible for you, and embrace it, accept it, And remember, the crazy thing about our brains and our nervous systems is it doesn't know the difference between what we're imagining and what we're experiencing. So if you get into a deep, intense visualization, are you familiar with the free throw study, by the way?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So it's a famous study. I think it was in 1996. Neuroscientists and researchers, I need to go back and grab the link for it. But they took 3 groups of people. The first group, they had practice shooting free throws every day for an hour. Their free throw shot improvement went up by like 80%. Second group had to visualize shooting free throws every day for an hour. Guess what? Their improvement was like 78%, marginally less than the first group. And all they did is sat there and visualize. Third group, they didn't do anything. Their free throw percentage stayed the same, right? So that proved how powerful it is just to visualize and see, because it literally, your nervous system doesn't know the difference if you get in a deep, intensive visualization and meditation, right? But especially when you're on these substances, because you got this critical period of reopening where your neuroplasticity is surged. And that's why even like Johns Hopkins now, they're also doing some research around stroke victims, how they can rapidly relearn how to walk, how to talk using things like psilocybin, where because of the neuroplasticity surge, they're back at the level of like a healthy 4 or 5-year-old. And one other thing I should mention on the other neurochemistry side and the neurotransmitter side, substances like creatine, very commonly, very cheaply, and very easily affordable, is also a neurotransmitter. But most of us are acting and living in deficits of our neurotransmitters. My favorite one is NAD. NAD is vital for 500 cellular processes, and it acts as a neurotransmitter. I've noticed it has huge benefit and reduces also the serotonin cliff that some people experience. Like I don't have a serotonin cliff anymore at all. When I do MDMA or anything like that, I feel amazing. But cellular energy wise, if you get enough NAD, you feel like my levels now are like the healthy level of a 12-year-old, because I can test through this Genfinity.com company. I test my NAD levels and I can see before and after. And so that in combination with the psychedelics is really what pulled us out of the depression spiral, because it gave my wife her energy back. Her cellular energy, she was like depleted, and pregnancy does a number on women. Not every woman has as rough of a battle as my wife, of course, but thank God. But those two things, what we're learning about neurochemistry and then brain optimization, healing trauma, we're in a golden age, and it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, man. I feel so grateful to live in today's age. Like, think about it, right? Like even with healthy food, I joke a lot, right? That like,
huge
if you decided to be
healthy food.
Yeah, it's huge, and like, if you think about being healthy in the 80s, it was like, eat some kale. That's all we got, right? Like today's
margarine.
Day and age, you could, yeah, exactly. Do some margarine. In today's day and age, you could even find like a quasi-healthy Oreo, like it's never been easier to
That's
like
true.
even still have some of your, your tendencies and things like that and be able to shift them. And, I completely agree with what you said, because some of Rachel and I's biggest breakthroughs have been specifically after MDMA, which it's funny because, I had this idea pop through for me a while back where when you get into like, I'm a raver, right. And things like that. And so when I discovered MDMA, it was at a young age, like, in my late teens, early 20s was when I first was exposed to it. I didn't do it the first time until I was 23, but like I was exposed to it being a club drug, and it seemed super fun, right? I never did it when I was in the club scene, just because I witnessed a lot of people doing some shady things, right? Like eating crystals off people's hands. They didn't even know what they were. I'm like, I'm not down with that, right? So, but when I first tried it, I was amazed because, everyone talked about this like, oh, you're super depressed the next couple of days and things like that. I just refuse to see it as just like, oh, I'm just having a serotonin crash and I'm just going to be depressed and the next couple of days suck and they're not useful and there's no lesson to learn. Like I was like, fuck that. That's not an empowering reality to live in. So what I've come to realize and how I choose to believe, what the come down or whatever it is after is called, is actually that's when you come back to reality and you still have your heart open, but all of your limiting beliefs and unconscious stories and tendencies are right there in the forefront, which they weren't when you were in the ceremony. So you're seeing all of the ways that you are limiting yourself from being able to feel the love that is all around you. Yeah. And that can create some severe depression in people if they don't know what to do about it. But at the same time, right, if you were the one that has those programs and is running those programs, those stories, those beliefs within you, well, who's the only person that can really remediate it? It's also you. So yeah, it might sting, but there's also a world of freedom on the other side of it. Yeah. And I love how you speak about these medicines, because I'm right in tow with you, man. Like, I think that there's a world where you can combine sacred medicines and what could be referred to as biohacking, which I don't even know what that term is based on, but for lack of a better term, like biohacking and sacred medicines together. Because I'll tell you that, for me, whenever I utilize MDMA, I have an extensive protocol that I utilize. And I got it from a doctor, Dr. Steve Young, great guy. He does a lot of alchemy and really cool guy. And I got the protocol from him. And it's funny because, when I will go to like a festival every once in a while, every couple of years or something like that, I'll talk to people and I'll ask them like, hey, are you going on any journeys when you're here, et cetera? And they'll say, yeah, I'm doing this or that, but I always feel like shit the next day. And I'm like, oh, what are you eating? And they're like, well, I brought a bunch of Lunchables and things like that. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, here, you should take some of these supplements. Yeah. And they'll come up to me regularly and be like, what did you give me yesterday? Like, this is the best I've ever felt. I'm like, well, it's probably because you just need nourishing overall. But it's like when you supplement yourself with the things that these medicines can not burn through, I don't think that's a great way to put it, but, illuminate for you, like when you can really allow your body to be balanced, not just during the experience, but also after, you're really putting your effort in. And now you are in a co-creative relationship, because the medicines may show you the what, right? They may allow you to face the what. But when you come back to your reality, it's our side of the mission, right? Or our end of the bargain to hold up the how, right? How are we going to bring more of that into our lives? And so I love this because it's really like, just like a relationship, right? Like if your wife is cooking you dinner every night of the week and you were just like leaving your plates around and doing nothing, eventually she'd be kind of frustrated. But maybe she's like, hey, I'll cook for you. I just don't like cleaning. You're like, I don't mind cleaning at all, right? Now you're in a co-communicative and co-creative relationship. You found harmony. And I really think that's what a lot of people are missing in the plant medicine space. And then what they do is they go, oh, cannabis or psilocybin, they made me anxious or maybe paranoid. It's like, no, you might have failed to check in with your nervous system. You might have taken the wrong dose, et cetera. But the mushroom, the cannabis, the ayahuasca, whatever it was just growing there. It didn't tell you to connect with it. And so until we take responsibility for that aspect of the journeys as well, we're going to be living a life of disempowerment, so I'm completely with you, man.
Yeah, and you bring up great points, whether it's THC. Like I've learned so much from you already, and from cannabis. And by the way, we got my dad doing a little Delta 8. My mom texted me, and he slept great. He was having some sleep issues, and so like all the different strands. There's so much to learn, but and I'll illustrate too, like the breakthrough moment for my wife's depression. The biggest breakthrough, like the other pieces were like smaller breakthroughs, but she had the therapy session. So like I'll illustrate this because I think it's really important for the audience to learn, if you're considering some of these, how important the guidance is and the support in the container. So Tuesday evening, this is last February. So at the end of last February, so it's February 1st right now as we're recording. And on that Tuesday evening, my daughter cried for like 30 seconds. My wife had a 2-hour meltdown that led, where she's crying on the basement steps, and then 2 more hours before we go to bed, she's just depressed. Next day, a depression hangover. Fortunately, that day we had a full journey of 2.5 grams psilocybin scheduled with a guided therapist to guide her through that experience. That lasted 5 hours. I could tell something was different, right? We dropped my daughter off at my mom's. Next day, Sonnet, our daughter, 18-month-old, is back. She has an 18-minute temper tantrum. So remember, 30 seconds 2 days before spiraled my wife. And that was common. That was happening all the time, right? My wife could not handle the screaming and crying because it would trigger her back to her traumatic childhood of abuse and all the craziness of her family. Well, guess what happened? She laughed. She literally laughed as my daughter is like writhing on the floor as a temper tantrum, normal toddler temper tantrum that she just got to let him process it and get it out and then hold him and love on him afterwards. Well, that she recognized it wasn't triggering her nervous system anymore. It was literally, it had disassociated. She was like, I could laugh. I could recognize, hey, my daughter's just being ridiculous. She's going through a spell for a moment. Well, now her nervous system had been reprogrammed. And we started recognizing that her depression, she would say today, her depression is cured. She doesn't think she's depressed anymore. No, she can have down moments, but where she was versus now, all good. Complex PTSD, we would say 80 to 90% cured. And she's like on the other side of like we just got a few more mini rounds left, and we think we're going to have most of that really nipped in the bud, the remaining. And that happened because of the container, that happened because of the magic of her therapist, coupled with the magic of the substance that gave the capacity for the nervous system to be rewired. It's the right recipe. You have to be looking when you're rewiring your nervous system. What's the right recipe for me? And then what's the right recipe for the recovery? What you were talking about too, of even, the downside of some of these experiences. Well, like Super Bowl winners, the day afterwards, they feel depressed. Like it's a natural to go from a high to a low. But now what I've found if you are boosting yourself back up with the 5-HTP, the GABA, and the NAD optimization and creatine, you're going to feel great. The vitamin Bs, all that, you're going to come right back. And I notice my dip is so low now. Barely perceptible. I have almost no dip the next day. And it's because of the optimization stuff that I do. And I'm now my higher high is higher than my previous higher high, and my low is higher than my previous high in some regards. Right? Because of the biohacking, the mental neurochemistry side, it's available for us all. And I just share that wherever you're at, if you or someone you love is battling mental health, reach out to me as well. Reach out to Ryan. Like there's solutions in this space. And there's not a single silver bullet. It's probably going to be a combo, but you can and find, like my wife has had 3 incurable diseases or issues. We've got them all, she would say, cured at this point.
Dude, it's so epic, man. And it's so true, right? Like we all know the analogy of, a child, right? Like if a child is raised in an environment that is very brash and very challenging, they will grow up with a very challenged view of reality, versus if they grow up in a really loving household, they will have a much better chance of growing up and having a beautiful life and, being full of love and all of those things. And so why would it be any different, right? In the medicine space or with any aspect of life? I think one of the funniest and potentially craziest things that is within the psychedelic space is, especially when you're younger, like for me, like when I was around, 20, 21, 22, 23, there's this big thing of like, hey, go to a festival and try psychedelics for the first time. And when you really know, when you've gone enough on these journeys, you're like, that is the Olympic level sport of taking these medicines, right? Yeah. Like, let me go put myself in an environment that I've maybe never been in before, potentially in the middle of a fucking city, for God's sakes. Yeah. Then let me be around 20 to 50,000 other people. Let me have conflicting sounds with heavy bass whipping at me in every direction. And then let me try to figure that out, right? As a beginner. It's like, no wonder there are so many horror stories, right? But again, what I always tell people is exactly what you're saying, right? It's like, don't blame the medicine for that, right? We don't need more laws around medicine. We need more schooling. We need more education. Like at what point do we actually start discontinuing blaming the medicine and start going, hey, where are we as human beings messing up? Why do people think that's the right way to do it? Or that's going to, really pan out. And again, I'm not here as a dad being like, oh, you can't go have fun, but just things to be aware of, because I think for me, like I thought like, oh, that's where you start this stuff. And it's like, no, that is not where you start this stuff. That's not even necessarily where you end it.
No, definitely not. Yeah. But it's a crazy experience, right? Like, and it's, I think at the end of the day, as our society comes to accept that these are just tools, but like we've had our wool pulled over our heads about what's safe and what's not safe. Like one of the crazy stats that it showed, you can look up this YouTube video, Big Think YouTube video with Dr. Matthew Johnson at Johns Hopkins, and goes through the safety of medicines, right? And guess what has the most side effects and bad results? Alcohol. Right. And then on down the list, and like as you go down, like as you get towards the bottom, like cannabis is there. And then even below cannabis is like MDMA and psilocybin. Like the side effects are minimal when used wisely. You got to use human wisdom with anything. If I go and eat fried chicken at KFC, it's legal. I'm going to look like crap and feel like crap. So Super Size Me, watch that documentary, what McDonald's does for you for a month. But, but there's so much hope and there's so much joy to be found. And so much, I personally believe that anyone that is open to change and wanting change, or any marriage, like I have leaders that I work with that like we're opening up their marriage back in the sense of getting them reconnected into a loving state. And I tell people, hey, if you're open, I will guarantee success, because I just know with the right combo of determination and openness, the medicines are going to create the receptivity in the playground. And then we supplement it with, just partly because I have enough understanding of human psychology of what needs to happen. And so I love seeing this change. I love this era that we're in. And I love, your spirit. By the way, you got to teach me so much more on THC and cannabis. Okay. Like I'm doing CBD and a little bit, but like do it wisely in the right strands, because there's so much to learn. And there's so many, like psilocybin, there's 76 strands, if I remember correctly. Like there's so much variety in this world, so much we don't know yet.
Oh, 100%, man. And every single, not even every strain, but every phenotypic variation of that strain also has a very unique profile to it. And not just profile on a scientific level with cannabinoids, terpenes, et cetera, but a unique spirit, right? Like a unique, just like human beings, right? Like, yes, we all come from one source, but we're all individually expressing in unique ways. And I found cannabis, psilocybin, et cetera, to be the same way. It was really funny when I got into psilocybin. The common saying was a cube is a cube is a cube, right? So basically what they're saying is a cubensis mushroom is like any other cubensis mushroom. There's really no difference between one and the other. Yeah. And so this got me in a lot of hot water when I made an 18-gram penis NVT and didn't realize it until after, right? Because I was like, and it was funny because like as a cannabis person, I was like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about psilocybin to really know the difference, but I was like, okay, I guess maybe that's possible. But even as like a 23-year-old, I was like, that doesn't really make any sense. And now as a 32-year-old, I'm like, okay, yeah, like there's a lot of, variation within there. I mean, not to mention the fact that no two doses are going to be the same, just based on the fact that you're not the same man and you're not in the same river, right? Metaphorically, right? You can be a woman too, of course. But, it's like being able to really understand that, like Hamilton was just saying this too. He's like, no matter how much you might be able to go, okay, like, I can kind of figure out this experience. Like I'm going to take someone, it's going to take about 45 minutes. I'm going to start to feel the onset. He's like, once it blows you open though, there's no fucking telling what's going to come forth. So it's extremely important that we know why we're going there. We're surrendered to how the plant or medicine actually brings us to that conclusion. And like you were saying, right, we're open to whatever the plant gives us, like it's just like when you go sign up for a new program, would you go in there and then start fighting the instructor on everything they say? No, you're there because you're looking for something new. So allow that person to share something new with you, right? And maybe it does trigger you. Maybe it comes up against something. Great. That means it's triggering your comfort zone. What the hell did you show up for if not for that, And so it's just really, really powerful, and dude, I'd love to hear a little bit too. I mean, you host these amazing retreats and I know the listeners are really excited about this. I get hit up all the time. Like if you'd be open to sharing a little bit about what these retreats are, things like that. Of course, I'll link it in the show notes and everything like that, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about it, man. They sound awesome.
Well, I can't wait for you and your lady to be at one of them here soon. Hopefully it's going to be epic. Yes. The thing, especially if you never experience, I'll give two caveats. If you never experience plant medicines, it's going to be one of the most spectacular experiences of your life. And I literally guarantee that in the experience. And here's why. Because the medicines that we take, the blends are just right. Like something magical about the blends and some mix of the sacred substances, we'll call them Kanna, sassafras, MDMA, a few other things that, my co-facilitator, he knows all the details on those things. But what happens is your body gets flooded with love and gets flooded with empathy. And then you're in a room of like 15 or so people that are all also flooded with love and connection and empathy, which creates a safe container. And it's tightly guided in the sense of screened, making sure we got safe, good-hearted people in the space. They're there for the right reasons, all that, protected. So it's safe for, both sexes and all that jazz. Well, what happens is what was broken in a relationship now has space to be healed in a relationship. I'll share one story. One of the guys that came at the last retreat, we'll call him D. We'll call him Dan. All right. He battled some depression and actually attempted suicide 2 years ago. Had a lot of shame from that, but also from like he had cheated on an ex. And now from a woman he loved, he had cheated on her and they broke up and like his city that he was living in, lots of shame. Well, first night, basically what happens, the medicine opens him up. I could tell he was battling it. I came over and sat with him. And one of the things we talk about is like, you are not your feelings. Your feelings are passing through you. And then I invited him to let those feelings move through them, not hold on to them like you had been doing for several years, to invite him to release, and then also to invite him to let love flow through him again. And literally he shifted. Second half of the evening, he was loving and connecting up with others. He was letting love flow through him. By the end of the weekend, we did 2 ceremonies. So it's a Thursday evening, Saturday ceremony. Friday, we don't do medicine. We do NLP, breath work, reprogramming, all that stuff of our nervous system, somatic work, body work around somatics, like releasing trauma. Well, by Sunday, when we did Sunday integration, you could tell his countenance, his joy, his face was like where there was a little cloud of gray. There was a sunlight bursting through. And even months later, we're connecting and he's still got that. And I've seen that happen from the retreat previously, where 6, 7, 8 months later, people are still bursting with that lightness. And I know in my own spirit, I don't carry around what I call like the bags of bricks that I was carrying around. Right. So it's the ceremonial aspect guiding you into this deeper heart connection, this deeper love connection, this deeper presence with yourself instead of the stressed and anxious state that we often see ourselves swimming in. I've seen women shift from their masculine back into their feminine. I've seen men heal the trauma and go from emotionally stuck to emotionally connected and vibrant. I've seen marriages that were on the brink of divorce, literally talking about divorce. I had 2 marriages in January of 2023. Come within minutes, one of the marriages, they were having the best conversation they'd had in 10 years of marriage and reactivated their love and their connection. Now they're in a healthier, more loving, more connected state than they've been in the whole 10 years. And it's all there for us. Like, they don't necessarily need the medicine anymore to connect. That enhances it, but they're in that state and presence. And I'm in that state and presence with my wife, where we have love and intimacy and joy and connection and awareness. And we're not, like, lots of times when we're interacting with a significant other too, we're not really interacting with them in this present moment. We're interacting with them and all their baggage and all this story and that wound and that hurt and that trauma. And they're interacting with all this, and we're interacting with old programming. But the challenge is for us as human beings, is our programming gets, especially if we're mature past age 25, our neuroplasticity has dropped. And our programming becomes harder and harder wired in. So neurons that fire together, wire together. Well, we kind of get wired together especially by the time you're in your 30s and 40s and 50s and beyond. But this is like a fresh surge to rewire your programming, how you show up in life. Business ideas. Actually, one of the crazy things I read in this book called Cosmic Serpent and other places, I've seen, I think 3 Nobel Prize winners have gotten their Nobel Prize download. Even the guy who found DNA, discovered DNA, got the download on a medicine journey, ayahuasca for that one, right? So it's like opens you up to this capacity to receive and connect with this consciousness that goes way beyond, that is in the quantum space, that is in the Napoleon Hill wrote about it in Think and Grow Rich, this mastermind, this beyondness and oneness that, Jesus talked about, spiritual leaders talked about, that is there for us. And it helps us access it like that. That's the beauty.
Dude, I absolutely agree with that, because, at the end of the day, like, we're not born to just pay taxes and die, right? Like, this is what our potential is. And it doesn't have anything to do with how much money is in our bank account, how many cars we own. Like, sure, those things may happen as a result of us feeling fucking awesomely abundant inside. But, again, it's once again putting the cart before the horse. Like, what we're truly here for is to ride the highs and the lows and see it all as happening for us, right? At the end of the day, like, like you said earlier, like, we want to be the victor of our story, not the victim. Yeah. And it is up to us, and we don't have to do it alone. That's why these plants are here, right? That's why these teachers and coaches and all of these people are here to support us in our ability to become, shameless plug, highly optimized, right? Like, you know, at the end of the day, like that's what it's all about, man. So Mike, it's been amazing, dude. I can't wait to have you back on. You know, we have so many other things we can dive into, but you know, where can people find you, man? Where can they find out more about the retreats, all the things you offer? Because there's so much we didn't even get into.
Yeah.
I'll make sure to put it all in the show notes, but where can they find you, man?
Yeah. First thing on any of the social media channels, Instagram, etc., the Mike Zeller. That's Zeller. Just come find me there, follow me, message me. Dude, this is a passion as much as anything for me. So feel free to reach out, have questions, fill stock. I'd be glad to help. Then if you want, I have a free download that goes through the 14 most powerful tools to rewire your nervous system. So just go to neurorewiring.com, neurorewiring.com, and then mikezeller.com for the rest of the stuff. But again, all social channels, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, the Mike Zeller. Would love to hear from you. So thanks for having me on too, man. This is a blast, and can't wait to see you at the next retreat. So it's gonna be epic.
Dude, I am so excited, man. The magic has only just begun. And for everyone that tuned into this episode, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I think I speak for all of us that listen to this when I say that this was an absolutely amazing ride into not only Mike's journey, but also a lot of things that hit near and dear for a lot of us, right? We covered mental health. We covered, you know, persevering through it, and we covered becoming the victor of our story. And so for anyone looking to reach out to Mike, I highly recommend doing so. His retreats are second to none. I'll be at the next one for sure with Rachel. So maybe I'll see you there. But thank you guys so much wherever you are in the world. I hope you're having the best day ever. And I'm sending you all my love to infinity and beyond. Peace, everybody.